Once upon a time, in a kingdom where the sun painted golden patterns on marble walls and flowers bloomed in every garden, there lived a princess named Psyche. But oh my, she wasn't just any princess. Psyche was so beautiful that when people saw her, they would gasp and cover their mouths with their hands, as if they had just seen the most magnificent rainbow after a storm. Her hair flowed like liquid moonlight, shimmering silver and gold all at once. Her eyes sparkled like the clearest ocean on the sunniest day. And when she smiled, it was as if 1,000 fireflies had suddenly lit up the evening sky. Even the flowers in the garden would turn their faces toward her as she walked by, hoping to catch just a tiny bit of her radiance. But here's where our story takes a worrisome turn, dear child. You see, Psyche was so incredibly beautiful that people began to forget about someone very important. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, who lived high up on Mount Olympus with all the other gods. When a goddess gets jealous. Now, Aphrodite had always been the most beautiful being in all the world. People would build lovely temples for her, leave gifts of roses and honey, and sing songs about her gorgeous golden hair and her smile that could make winter turn to spring. But suddenly, everyone was talking about Princess Psyche instead. Have you seen Princess Psyche? The people would whisper in the marketplace. She's more beautiful than Aphrodite herself. Yes, yes, others would agree. Surely she must be a goddess too. Up on Mount Olympus, where the clouds swirl like cotton candy and the marble floors shine like mirrors, Aphrodite heard every single word. Her cheeks turned as red as the ripest strawberries, and her eyes flashed like lightning during a thunderstorm. More beautiful than me, she huffed, her voice echoing through the heavenly halls. We shall see about that. You know how sometimes, when you're playing with your toys and someone says your friend's toy is better, and you feel that hot, uncomfortable feeling in your tummy, that's exactly how Aphrodite felt, except 1,000 times stronger, because she was a goddess and her feelings were as big as mountains. The goddess's terrible plan. Aphrodite paced back and forth in her beautiful palace, her golden sandals clicking on the shiny floor. She needed a plan, a way to make sure that everyone would remember who the real goddess of beauty was. I know exactly what to do, she said with a smile that wasn't kind at all. I'll call my son Eros. Now, Eros was a very special boy. He had soft, feathery wings that could carry him faster than the swiftest bird, and he carried a magical bow with arrows that could make anyone fall in love. But these weren't just any arrows. They were golden arrows that could make someone fall deeply, madly in love with the very first person they saw. Eros was Cupid, the little god of love. When Eros fluttered into his mother's palace, his wings shimmering like soap bubbles in the sunlight, Aphrodite bent down and whispered her plan into his ear. My darling son, she said, her voice sweet as honey, but with something cold underneath. I need you to fly down to Earth and find Princess Psyche. When you see her, shoot her with one of your golden arrows. But here's the important part. Make sure the first thing she sees is the most horrible, ugly monster you can find. Then she'll fall in love with something so terrible that no one will ever call her beautiful again. Eros's big, innocent eyes grew wide. He had never been asked to use his arrows to hurt someone before. Usually his arrows brought happiness and love and joy. But his mother was a goddess, and when a goddess gives you a task, you must obey. The journey to Earth. That very night when the moon was high and silvery, and all the children of the kingdom were fast asleep in their beds, Eros spread his magnificent wings and flew down from Mount Olympus. He soared over sleeping cities and quiet forests, over rivers that sparkled like ribbons of stars, until he reached the kingdom where Princess Psyche lived. He perched on the windowsill of her bedroom tower, as quiet as a whisper, and peeked inside. The room was decorated with soft curtains that danced in the gentle breeze, and moonbeams painted everything in silver light. And there, sleeping peacefully on her bed, covered in silk blankets the color of rose petals, was Princess Psyche. Eros had seen many beautiful things in his life. He had watched sunrises paint the sky in orange and pink, seen fields of flowers swaying in summer breezes, and gazed upon his mother's own divine beauty. But when he saw Psyche sleeping so peacefully, with her hair spread across her pillow like spun starlight, and her face gentle and kind even in sleep, something very unexpected happened. His heart began to beat faster, like a little bird fluttering in his chest. His cheeks grew warm, and he felt dizzy, as if he had been spinning in circles. For the first time in his entire existence, Eros, the god of love, had fallen in love himself. The accident that changed everything. Eros was so surprised by these new, wonderful, scary feelings that his hand began to shake. He was supposed to shoot Psyche with an arrow while she looked at something horrible, but instead, he found himself just staring at her beautiful, peaceful face. I can't do it, he whispered to himself. She's too kind, too gentle. I won't hurt her. But as he tried to put his golden arrow back in his quiver, something terrible happened. His hands were shaking so much from all these new feelings that he accidentally pricked himself with the tip of his own arrow. Now, you might think, what's the big deal about that? But remember, these were magical arrows. The moment the golden tip touched Eros' skin, the magic that was meant for Psyche worked on him instead. Since Psyche was the first person he was looking at, he fell even more deeply in love with her than he already had. But here's the really tricky part. Eros knew that his mother had sent him to hurt Psyche, and now he loved her too much to ever let that happen. He had to protect her. But how could he do that when his own mother was against her? The mysterious curse. Meanwhile, down in the kingdom, something very strange was happening to poor Princess Psyche. Even though she was the most beautiful girl anyone had ever seen, no one was asking to marry her. You see, her beauty was so incredible, so otherworldly, that every prince and king who came to meet her felt too nervous and scared to even talk to her. They would take one look at her glowing face, her sparkling eyes, and her gentle smile, and think, she must be a goddess. I'm just a regular person. I could never marry someone so divine. So they would bow politely, stammer a few words, and quickly leave the palace. Psyche's two older sisters, who were pretty but not nearly as beautiful as she was, both found wonderful husbands and moved away to live in their own castles. But poor Psyche remained alone in her father's palace, growing sadder and more lonely with each passing day. Why doesn't anyone want to marry me? She would ask her reflection in the mirror, tears making her beautiful eyes shimmer like dewdrops. Am I too strange, too different? The king and queen Her loving parents watched their youngest daughter grow more and more unhappy, and their hearts ached for her. They decided to visit the oracle, a wise woman who could speak to the gods and learn about the future. The oracle's frightening prophecy. The oracle lived in a mysterious temple on top of a tall mountain, where mist swirled around ancient columns and the air hummed with magic. When the king and queen climbed all the way to the top and asked about their daughter's future, the oracle's eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, and she spoke in a voice that seemed to come from very far away. The princess is destined for a husband, but not a mortal man. Her love waits for her on the tallest mountain peak, where the wind howls and eagles fear to fly. He is a creature feared by gods and mortals alike, a monster with wings who brings both love and terror wherever he goes. Take her to the mountain and leave her there, or face the wrath of the gods. When the king and queen heard these words, they felt as if their hearts had turned to stone. Their beautiful, kind daughter was destined to marry a monster. It couldn't be true, but they knew that you must always obey the words of the oracle, or terrible things would happen to the entire kingdom. With heavy hearts and tears streaming down their faces, they returned home to tell Psyche about her fate. The saddest wedding day. When Psyche heard what the oracle had said, she felt scared and confused, but she was also very brave. She loved her parents and her people, and she didn't want anything bad to happen to them because of her. "If this is what the gods have decided," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, even though she was frightened, "then I will go. I won't let our kingdom suffer because of me." So the very next day, instead of a happy wedding with flowers and music and dancing, there was the saddest procession anyone had ever seen. Psyche wore a beautiful white dress, but instead of walking toward a happy bridegroom, she was being taken to a lonely mountain to meet a monster. The whole kingdom followed behind her, crying and throwing flowers. But they were flowers of farewell, not celebration. Even the birds seemed to sing more quietly, and the sun hid behind clouds as if it too was sad. When they reached the tall, windy mountain peak, Psyche's parents hugged her one last time. Her mother's tears fell like rain, and her father's hands shook as he kissed her forehead. "We love you so much, our brave daughter," they whispered. "Whatever happens, remember that you are loved." Then, because the oracle had said they must leave her alone, they walked back down the mountain, leaving Psyche all by herself on the rocky peak as the sun began to set. Alone on the mountain, Psyche stood on the mountaintop, her white dress fluttering in the strong wind, like the wings of a dove. The sun was painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and soon it would be completely dark. She was scared, but she tried to be brave. "Where is this monster husband I'm supposed to meet?" she wondered aloud, looking around at the empty rocks and twisted trees. Maybe the oracle was wrong. Maybe no one will come at all. But just as she thought this, the wind began to blow stronger and stronger, until it wasn't just wind anymore. It was Zephyrus, the west wind himself, sent on a very special mission. The wind wrapped around Psyche like invisible, gentle arms and lifted her right off the ground. She gasped in surprise, but the wind held her safely, as carefully as if she were made of the most delicate glass. "Don't be afraid," the wind seemed to whisper in her ear. I'm taking you somewhere safe, somewhere beautiful, where you will be happier than you ever imagined. Higher and higher the wind carried her, over valleys and forests, over rivers that looked like silver threads from so high up, until they reached a hidden valley that no human had ever seen before. The magical palace. As the west wind gently set Psyche down in a meadow filled with flowers that glowed softly in the twilight, she gasped in amazement. Before her stood the most magnificent palace she had ever seen. And remember, she was a princess who had lived in a very grand castle. This palace seemed to be made of dreams and starlight. The walls sparkled with gems of every color: rubies, red as rose petals, sapphires blue as the deepest ocean, emeralds green as spring leaves, and diamonds that twinkled like tiny stars. Golden towers reached up toward the sky, and beautiful gardens full of singing fountains surrounded everything. "Welcome, dear princess," said a voice, though Psyche couldn't see anyone at all. "This is your new home." Who's speaking?" Psyche asked, looking around in wonder. "We are your servants," said another invisible voice, this one from a different direction. "We've been waiting so long to take care of you." Are you the monster I was supposed to marry?" Psyche asked nervously. The invisible voices laughed, and their laughter sounded like silver bells ringing. "Oh no, dear princess. We are just spirits who live here to make sure you're comfortable and happy. Your husband will come to you when the time is right." The invisible servants. As Psyche walked toward the magnificent palace, she realized that she could hear footsteps all around her, but she couldn't see anyone making them. Invisible hands opened the great doors for her, and she stepped into halls so beautiful they took her breath away. The floors were made of smooth marble that reflected everything like mirrors, and the ceilings were painted with pictures of clouds and birds and angels. Everywhere she looked, there were fresh flowers in golden vases, and the air smelled like roses and lavender. "You must be hungry after your journey," said one of the invisible voices kindly. "We've prepared a feast for you." Invisible servants led her to a dining room, where a table was set with plates of gold and cups studded with jewels. And oh, the food! There were fruits that tasted like sunshine, bread that was soft as clouds, honey that seemed to have been made by magical bees, and water that was clearer and more refreshing than any she had ever tasted. As she ate, invisible, musicians played the most beautiful music on harps and flutes. The melodies were so lovely that they made her feel peaceful and safe, even though everything was so strange and magical. "This doesn't seem like the home of a terrible monster," Psyche thought to herself. "Everyone here is so kind to me. Maybe my husband won't be scary after all." The first night of mystery. After dinner, the invisible servants showed Psyche to her bedroom, and it was even more wonderful than the rest of the palace. The bed was covered in silk sheets softer than rose petals, and the pillows were stuffed with the fluffiest feathers from swans. Beautiful tapestries covered the walls, showing pictures of gardens and butterflies and happy children playing. "Sleep well, dear princess," whispered the invisible voices. "Tomorrow will bring new wonders." As Psyche lay in the incredibly comfortable bed, she felt confused but not scared anymore. Everything in this palace was beautiful and kind, even if her husband was a monster. Surely he couldn't be too terrible if he lived in such a wonderful place and had such caring servants. She was just starting to drift off to sleep when she heard something that made her heart beat faster. The soft sound of footsteps approaching her room, and then the gentle creak of her door opening. "Who's there?" she whispered into the darkness. "Don't be afraid," said a voice. And oh my, it was the most beautiful voice she had ever heard. It was warm and gentle, like honey mixed with music, and it made her feel safe and happy all at once. "I am your husband, but I can't see you," Psyche said softly. "I know, and I'm sorry about that," the voice replied. "There are reasons why I can't let you see me yet, but I promise you I will never hurt you. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, more than all the flowers in all the gardens of the world." And somehow, even though she couldn't see him, Psyche felt in her heart that this was true. When he spoke, she could hear such kindness and love in his voice that all her fears melted away, like snow in springtime. They talked quietly in the darkness, and he told her stories about faraway places and magical creatures, about flying over oceans and dancing with the wind. His voice was so wonderful, and he was so gentle and funny, that Psyche found herself laughing and feeling happier than she had in months. A love that grows in darkness. And so began the strangest and most wonderful time of Psyche's life. Every day, she would wake up in her beautiful palace and spend time with her invisible servants, who took care of her every need. They would brush her hair with combs made of pearl, dress her in gowns more beautiful than any she had ever owned, and bring her meals that tasted like they had been prepared by the gods themselves. She could explore the magnificent palace and its gardens where flowers sang to her and fountains danced just for her enjoyment. There were libraries full of books that read themselves aloud, art galleries where the paintings moved and told their own stories, and music rooms where instruments played the most beautiful melodies all by themselves. But the best part of every day was when the sun set and her mysterious husband would come to visit her in the darkness. She still couldn't see him. He always came after she had blown out all the candles, and when the room was completely dark. But oh, how she loved the sound of his voice. He would tell her about his day, about flying through clouds and seeing the world from high above. He would ask about her day and listen to every word she said as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. He would make her laugh with silly jokes and comfort her when she felt sad about missing her family. Night after night, Psyche fell more and more in love with her husband. Even though she had never seen his face, she loved his kindness, his gentle way of speaking, his wonderful sense of humor, and how safe and cherished he made her feel. But there was one rule that he had asked her to follow, and it was very important. She must never, ever try to see him or light a lamp when he was with her. "Promise me," he had said on that very first night, his voice serious and a little sad. "If you ever see my face, I will have to leave you forever, and we will both be terribly unhappy. Can you promise me that you'll never try to look at me?" Because Psyche loved him so much, and because his voice sounded so worried when he asked, she had promised. But as the days and weeks went by, she couldn't help but wonder, why couldn't she see her husband? What could be so terrible about his appearance that he had to hide it from her? The worry that wouldn't go away. As happy as Psyche was in her magical palace with her loving husband and kind, invisible servants, there was a little worry that lived in her heart like a tiny storm cloud on a sunny day. Sometimes when she was alone during the day, she would think about what the oracle had said, that her husband was a monster feared by gods and mortals alike. But he didn't seem like a monster at all. He was gentle and kind and made her feel so loved and special. Maybe, she would think to herself, he's not really a monster. Maybe he just looks different. Or maybe he's shy. Maybe he thinks I won't love him if I see what he looks like. She wanted so badly to tell him that she would love him no matter what he looked like, because she had fallen in love with his heart, his soul, his wonderful personality. She loved how he cared about her feelings, how he remembered every little thing she told him, how he always knew exactly what to say to make her smile when she felt sad. But every time she started to bring up the subject of seeing him, he would gently change the topic, and his voice would sound so sad that she didn't want to make him unhappy. And so the days passed in this strange but wonderful way. Perfect happiness mixed with just a tiny bit of mystery and worry, like a beautiful song with one note that didn't quite fit. Little did Psyche know that high above in the clouds, someone was watching her happiness with growing anger, and that someone was planning to destroy everything. The jealous sisters arrive. Meanwhile, back in the kingdom where Psyche used to live, her two older sisters were growing more and more curious about what had happened to their beautiful younger sister. They had heard that she was taken to a mountain to marry a monster, and they couldn't stop wondering if she was still alive. "We should go visit her," said the first sister, whose name was Agatha. But really, she wasn't worried about Psyche at all. She was jealous and hoped to find her sister, miserable and ugly, living in a cave with a horrible monster. "Yes, let's go see how terrible her life has become," agreed the second sister, whose name was Cordelia. She too was secretly hoping that Psyche was unhappy, because she had always been jealous of her youngest sister's incredible beauty. So the two sisters climbed up the tall mountain where Psyche had been left, expecting to find bones or a cave or some sign of terrible tragedy. Instead, imagine their surprise when the west wind suddenly swooped them up, just as it had done with Psyche, and carried them to the hidden valley. When they saw the magnificent palace sparkling with jewels and surrounded by magical gardens, their mouths fell open in shock. This can't be where Psyche lives," gasped Agatha. "It's more beautiful than any palace I've ever seen," whispered Cordelia, and her voice was full of envy. A reunion, full of secrets. The invisible servants welcomed the sisters and led them to where Psyche was sitting, in a garden where the flowers hummed lullabies and butterflies had wings like stained glass windows. When Psyche saw her sisters, she was so happy that she jumped up and ran to hug them. "Oh, I've missed you both so much," she cried, tears of joy sparkling in her eyes like tiny diamonds. But as her sisters looked around at the incredible palace, the magical gardens, and Psyche herself, who looked happier and more beautiful than ever, their hearts grew hard with jealousy. "Tell us about your husband," said Agatha with a sweet smile that wasn't really sweet at all. "We want to know all about this monster you married." "Oh, he's wonderful," Psyche said, her face glowing with happiness. "He's kind and gentle and funny, and he loves me so much. He takes care of me and makes me laugh every single day." "But what does he look like?" pressed Cordelia. Psyche's smile faltered just a little. "Well, I haven't actually seen him yet, What? Both sisters exclaimed at once. He only comes to me at night when it's completely dark, Psyche explained. He asked me never to look at him, and I promised I wouldn't. The sisters exchanged a meaningful glance. They saw their chance to plant seeds of doubt in their sister's mind. The poison of doubt. Oh, you poor, foolish girl, said Agatha, pretending to look worried. Don't you remember what the oracle said? Your husband is a monster feared by gods and mortals alike. Think about it, added Cordelia, moving closer to Psyche. If he was handsome and normal, why would he hide his face from you? He must be so horrible to look at that he's afraid you'll run away screaming. No, that's not true, Psyche said, but her voice sounded less certain than before. He's gentle and loving. I can feel it in my heart. Hearts can be fooled, said Agatha slyly. Maybe he's putting a spell on you to make you think he's wonderful. Maybe he's really a terrible serpent, or a beast with claws and fangs. What if he's just fattening you up to eat you? Whispered Cordelia dramatically. What if one night you wake up and he's devouring you alive? Poor Psyche felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had been so happy, but now her sister's words were like drops of black ink falling into clear water, spreading and making everything cloudy and dark. I don't think, she started to say, but the doubt was already growing in her mind, like a thorny weed. You have to look at him, both sisters said together. You have to know the truth. The terrible plan. Before they left, the sisters gave Psyche a small oil lamp and a sharp knife. Hide these under your bed, Agatha instructed. Tonight, when your husband is asleep, light the lamp and look at him. If he really is a monster, you'll need the knife to protect yourself. But I promised I would never look at him, Psyche said weakly. Promises to monsters don't count, said Cordelia firmly. You have to think of your own safety. After her sisters left, carried away by the west wind, still grumbling with jealousy, Psyche sat alone in her beautiful palace, feeling more confused and frightened than she had since the day she first arrived. The invisible servants tried to cheer her up with her favorite foods and beautiful music, but she couldn't stop thinking about what her sisters had said. What if they were right? What if her husband really was a terrible monster who was just pretending to be kind? That night, when her husband came to her as always, she tried to act normal, but when he spoke to her in his wonderful, gentle voice, instead of feeling happy and safe, she felt scared and suspicious. You seem quiet tonight, my love, he said softly. Is everything all right? Yes, everything's fine, Psyche lied, and it was the first lie she had ever told him. The words tasted bitter in her mouth. They talked for a while, but Psyche's mind was spinning with worry and doubt. Finally, her husband fell asleep beside her, breathing peacefully. The moment of truth. For a long time, Psyche lay awake in the darkness, listening to her husband's gentle breathing. The lamp and knife were hidden under her bed, and she kept thinking about what her sisters had said. I have to know, she finally whispered to herself. I can't live with this fear anymore. Very, very quietly, she slipped out of bed and felt around under it until she found the lamp. Her hands were shaking as she lit it with a candle from the hallway. And then, taking a deep breath, she tiptoed back to the bed and held the lamp high. The golden light fell across her sleeping husband, and Psyche gasped so loudly that she almost dropped the lamp. But it wasn't a gasp of fear or horror. It was a gasp of wonder and amazement. There, sleeping peacefully in her bed, was the most beautiful young man she had ever seen. He had curly golden hair that caught the lamplight like spun sunshine, a face so handsome and kind that it took her breath away, and, oh my, the most magnificent white wings folded against his back, feathers soft and pure as fresh snow. He's an angel, Psyche whispered, tears of joy and relief streaming down her face. He's not a monster at all. He's the most beautiful being I've ever seen. As she looked closer, she saw a golden bow and a quiver of arrows beside the bed, and suddenly she understood. This was Eros, the god of love himself. Her husband wasn't a monster. He was one of the gods, the accident that changed everything. Psyche was so overwhelmed with happiness and relief that she wanted to lean down and kiss her beautiful husband. But as she moved closer, holding the lamp, a drop of hot oil splashed from the flame and landed right on Eros' shoulder. "Ow!" he cried, waking up instantly when he saw Psyche standing there with the lamp, his beautiful face filled with such sadness that it broke her heart. "Oh no," he whispered, sitting up and touching his burned shoulder. "You looked at me. You broke your promise." "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," Psyche cried, dropping the lamp and reaching for him. "But you're not a monster. You're beautiful. You're wonderful. I love you even more now that I can see you." But Eros was already spreading his magnificent wings. "I asked you for one thing," he said, and his voice was full of pain. "Just one thing. Never to look at me. And you couldn't trust me enough to keep that promise." "It wasn't because I didn't trust you," Psyche said desperately. "My sister said terrible things and I got scared, and I just had to know." "Your sisters?" Eros's eyes flashed with anger, but not at Psyche, at himself. "I should have known. I should have protected you from their jealousy." He stood up, his wings casting beautiful shadows on the walls. "I have to go, Psyche. My mother, Aphrodite, is still angry about your beauty. When she finds out that I disobeyed her and married you instead of hurting you, she'll be furious. I won't be able to protect you anymore." "Take me with you," Psyche begged, reaching for his hands. But Eros was already flying toward the window. "I can't," he said sadly. "I have to face my mother's anger alone. Maybe someday, if you prove to the gods that your love is real and strong, we can be together again." And with that, he flew out into the night sky, leaving Psyche alone and heartbroken. The palace disappears. The moment Eros flew away, something terrible happened. The beautiful palace began to fade away like a dream when you wake up. The sparkling walls became dim, the magical gardens withered, and the invisible servants' voices grew faint, and then disappeared entirely. Soon, Psyche found herself standing alone in an empty field under the cold stars, with nothing but the simple white dress she was wearing, the magnificent palace, the wonderful life she had lived there. Everything was gone, as if it had never existed at all. She fell to her knees and cried harder than she had ever cried in her life, not just because she had lost her beautiful home, but because she had lost the love of her life through her own lack of trust. "Eros," she called out to the empty sky. "I'm sorry. I love you. Please come back." But there was no answer except the wind whistling through the grass. Psyche's desperate quest. When the sun rose, Psyche stood up and wiped away her tears. She had made a terrible mistake, but she wasn't going to give up. If Eros had said that she might be able to win back his love by proving herself to the gods, then that's exactly what she would do. She began to walk, not knowing where she was going, but determined to find some way to make things right. She walked for days and days, through forests and over hills, asking everyone she met if they had seen Eros, or knew how she could reach the gods. Some people were kind and gave her food and water, but no one could help her find her lost love. She grew thin and tired. Her beautiful white dress became torn and dirty, and her feet were sore from walking on rocky paths. But still she didn't give up. Love gave her strength to keep going, even when everything seemed hopeless. Finally she came to a great temple dedicated to Aphrodite, the goddess of love. The temple was made of white marble and surrounded by gardens full of roses. Psyche knew this was dangerous. Aphrodite was angry with her, but she also knew this might be her only chance. Taking a deep breath, she walked up the marble steps and into the temple, face to face with the goddess. Inside the temple, everything was made of gold and ivory, and the air smelled like the most beautiful perfume. At the far end, on a throne that sparkled with diamonds, sat Aphrodite herself. The goddess was indeed incredibly beautiful, with golden hair that flowed like liquid sunlight, and eyes blue as the summer sky. But when she saw Psyche, her lovely face twisted with anger. "So," Aphrodite said, her voice like honey mixed with poison, "the little mortal princess dares to come to my temple, the girl who was so beautiful that people forgot about me, and who then stole my own son's heart." Psyche fell to her knees. "Please, great goddess," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I know I've caused you anger, and I'm sorry, but I love Eros with all my heart, and I'll do anything at all, to prove that my love is real and earn the right to be with him again." Aphrodite laughed, but it wasn't a nice laugh. "Oh, you'll do anything, will you? We shall see about that. I have some tasks for you, little mortal. If you can complete them all, maybe, just maybe, I'll consider letting you see my son again." Psyche's heart leaped with hope. "Yes, I'll do whatever you ask." "Don't be so eager," Aphrodite said with a cruel smile. "These aren't ordinary tasks. They're impossible tasks. No mortal has ever completed them and lived to tell about it." The first impossible task. Aphrodite waved her hand, and suddenly Psyche found herself in a huge room filled with an enormous pile of seeds. Wheat seeds, barley seeds, poppy seeds, lentils, beans, and many others, all mixed together in a mountain that reached nearly to the ceiling. "Your first task," Aphrodite announced, "is to sort all of these seeds into separate piles, every single seed in its proper place. You have until sunset, and if even one seed is in the wrong pile, you fail." Then the goddess disappeared in a swirl of rose petals, leaving Psyche alone with the impossible task. Psyche looked at the enormous pile of mixed seeds and felt her heart sink. There were millions and millions of seeds, all different sizes and colors, and she had only one day to sort them all. It was impossible for one person to do, even if she worked without stopping. But just as she was about to despair, she heard a tiny voice near her foot. "Don't cry, beautiful princess," squeaked the voice. "We'll help you." Psyche looked down and saw a little black ant looking up at her with kind eyes. You want to help me?" Psyche asked in amazement. Of course, said the ant. You were always kind to the small creatures in your garden when you were a princess. You never stepped on us or shooed us away. Now we'll help you. Suddenly, thousands and thousands of ants came marching into the room from cracks in the walls and floors. They formed organized lines and began working together, each ant carrying seeds to the proper piles. The ants worked so quickly and efficiently that by sunset, every single seed was sorted perfectly. Wheat with wheat, barley with barley, poppy seeds with poppy seeds. Everything exactly where it belonged. When Aphrodite returned and saw the completed task, her beautiful face grew dark with anger. She had been sure this task was impossible. The second impossible task. Lucky ants, Aphrodite said sourly. Let's see how you do with your second task. She transported Psyche to a riverbank where the water sparkled like liquid diamonds. On the other side of the river was a meadow where the most magnificent sheep Psyche had ever seen were grazing. But these weren't ordinary sheep. Their wool was pure gold, shining in the sunlight like metal. Your second task, Aphrodite said, is to bring me a handful of wool from those golden sheep. But be warned, they're not gentle farm animals. These sheep are fierce and wild, and their golden fleece is so sharp it can cut like knives. Many heroes have tried to get their wool, and all have been torn to pieces. Once again, the goddess disappeared, leaving Psyche staring across the river at the beautiful but dangerous sheep. As Psyche sat by the river wondering how she could possibly get the golden wool without being hurt, she heard a gentle voice speaking to her. It was coming from the river itself. Sweet princess, murmured the voice of the river. Don't try to approach the sheep during the day when the sun makes them wild and fierce. Wait until evening when they rest in the shade of the trees and become calm. Then you can safely gather the wool that catches on the thorns and branches where they've been grazing. So, Psyche waited patiently until the sun began to set. Sure enough, the golden sheep moved into the shadows and lay down to rest, no longer fierce and dangerous. Carefully, quietly, Psyche crossed the river and gathered handfuls of the beautiful golden wool that had caught on thorns and low branches. When she brought the glowing wool back to Aphrodite, the goddess was even angrier than before. Third impossible task. Beginner's luck, Aphrodite muttered, but this next task will surely be the end of you. She took Psyche to the base of a tall, dark mountain that stretched up so high its peak was hidden in the clouds. At the very top, she explained, was a spring where the blackest, coldest water in the world flowed. Your third task is to climb to the top of that mountain and bring me back a pitcher of water from that spring, Aphrodite said. But this isn't just any mountain. The path is guarded by terrible dragons that breathe fire and have eyes like burning coals. The rocks are so sharp, they'll cut your feet to ribbons. And the mountain is so high that the air becomes too thin to breathe. No mortal has ever reached the top and returned alive. Psyche looked up at the terrifying mountain and felt more afraid than she ever had before. But she thought of Eros and how much she loved him, and she started to climb. The mountain was every bit as horrible as Aphrodite had said. The rocks cut her hands and feet. The path was so steep, she could barely hold on, and strange sounds echoed from caves where the dragons lived. As she climbed higher, the air became so thin that she gasped for breath with every step. Just when she thought she couldn't go any further, she heard the sound of great wings beating in the air above her. Looking up, she saw the most magnificent eagle she had ever seen, with feathers that shone like bronze and eyes like golden coins. "I am the eagle of Zeus, king of all the gods," the great bird said in a voice like thunder. "I have been watching your quest, brave princess, and I am impressed by your courage and determination. Let me help you." The eagle swooped down, took the pitcher in his powerful talons, and flew to the very top of the mountain, where the spring bubbled with black water. He filled the pitcher and brought it back to Psyche, who was amazed and grateful. When Psyche presented the pitcher of water to Aphrodite, the goddess was so angry that sparks literally flew from her eyes. The final, most dangerous task. "Enough," Aphrodite screamed. "I have one last task for you, and this one will surely kill you." She handed Psyche a small golden box with a tight-fitting lid. "You must take this box to the underworld, the land of the dead, and ask Persephone, queen of the dead, to put some of her beauty into it. But here's the catch. You must go there alive, and you must return alive, and you must never ever open the box. If you open it even a tiny crack, you will die instantly." Now this was truly an impossible task. The underworld was the land where people went after they died, and living people weren't supposed to be able to go there and return. But Psyche had come this far, and she wasn't going to give up now. She asked many people how to get to the underworld, and finally, an old woman told her about a deep cave in the side of a mountain where there was supposed to be an entrance. Psyche found the cave and began the long, dark journey downward. She walked for what seemed like days, through tunnels that got darker and colder the deeper she went. Finally, she came to a huge underground river, where a mysterious old man in a boat was waiting. "I am Charon, the ferryman," he said in a creaky voice. "I carry souls across the river to the land of the dead. But you're still alive. Why do you want to go there?" "For love," Psyche said simply. "I need to see Queen Persephone for the sake of my true love." Charon looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Climb in," he said. "But remember, very few living people have ever made this journey and returned." In the land of the dead, the underworld was unlike anything Psyche had ever imagined. It wasn't scary or horrible. It was actually quite peaceful, but in a sad, quiet way. Everything was gray and silver, and there was no sound except for the soft whisper of spirits moving through the shadowy landscape. Psyche walked through fields of silver flowers toward a palace made of black marble, where Queen Persephone lived. The queen was beautiful but pale, with dark hair and eyes that had seen both great sorrow and great joy. "A living mortal in my realm," Persephone said, but she didn't sound angry, just curious. "What brings you here, child?" Psyche explained her quest and showed the queen the golden box. Persephone listened with growing interest and sympathy. "Ah, I know something about love that requires great sacrifice," Persephone said softly. "Very well, I will help you." She took the box and opened it. A swirl of the most beautiful, soft light came out and danced around her fingers before she guided it back into the box and closed the lid. "There," she said, handing it back to Psyche, "a small portion of beauty from the realm of the dead. But remember, you must not open this box, no matter how curious you become. The temptation. Psyche thanked Queen Persephone and began the long journey back to the world of the living. She crossed the dark river again, climbed through the tunnels, and finally emerged into sunlight. She was so happy to have completed the final task that she almost ran back toward Aphrodite's temple. But as she walked, she began to think about what was in the box. A portion of Persephone's beauty, she murmured to herself. I wonder what it looks like. She had been through so much, climbing mountains, walking for days, facing impossible tasks. She was tired and dirty, and she knew she didn't look her best. What if, when she finally saw Eros again, he thought she was too worn out and ugly? Maybe, she thought, I could just peek inside the box for a tiny second. Just enough to borrow a little bit of beauty to make myself pretty for Eros again. Even though she knew she shouldn't, the temptation was too strong. She sat down under a tree and carefully opened the box just a tiny crack to peek inside. But instead of beauty, what came out of the box was a deep, magical sleep. The sleep of the dead. Psyche collapsed under the tree and lay there as still as stone, the open box beside her. Eros to the rescue. Meanwhile, up on Mount Olympus, Eros had been miserable ever since he left Psyche. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and couldn't stop thinking about his beloved wife. He had been watching her complete each impossible task, and his heart swelled with pride at her courage and determination. When he saw her fall into the deadly sleep, he couldn't stand it anymore. His love for her was stronger than his fear of his mother's anger. Spreading his magnificent wings, he flew down from Mount Olympus as fast as he could. When he reached Psyche, he gently brushed the magical sleep from her eyes and put it back in the box, closing the lid tightly. Psyche's eyes fluttered open, and when she saw Eros kneeling beside her, her heart filled with joy. Eros, she cried, you came back to me. I never should have left, he said, gathering her into his arms. I love you too much to stay away, no matter what anyone says. I'm so sorry I broke my promise and looked at you, Psyche said, tears of happiness streaming down her face. I'm sorry I asked you to make such a difficult promise, Eros replied. I was afraid that if you saw I was a god, you'd think I was too different from you. But love isn't about how someone looks. It's about what's in their heart, and your heart is the most beautiful thing I've ever known. The happy ending. Together, Eros and Psyche flew to Mount Olympus, where Zeus, the king of all the gods, was waiting for them. He had been watching the whole story unfold, and he was very impressed with Psyche's courage and devotion. Aphrodite, Zeus said in his deep, powerful voice, this mortal girl has proven that her love is real and strong. She has completed impossible tasks and shown more bravery than many heroes. I think it's time to end this foolishness. Aphrodite wanted to argue, but she didn't dare disagree with Zeus, the king of the gods. Psyche, Zeus continued, you have earned the right to become immortal and live on Mount Olympus as a goddess. Will you accept this gift? Psyche looked at Eros, who was smiling at her with love shining in his eyes. Yes, she said, I accept. Zeus handed her a cup of ambrosia, the food of the gods. When Psyche drank it, She felt a warm, golden feeling spread through her entire body. Beautiful wings sprouted from her back, just like Eros's, and she became immortal, a goddess herself. The other gods cheered and threw flower petals that turned into butterflies as they fell. Even Aphrodite had to admit that Psyche was truly worthy of her son's love. The wedding of dreams. Eros and Psyche had the most wonderful wedding that Mount Olympus had ever seen. All the gods and goddesses came to celebrate, and even Psyche's parents were brought up from Earth to witness their daughter's happiness. The wedding feast was held in a palace made of clouds and starlight, with music played by the 9 muses themselves. Apollo, the god of music, sang a song about true love that was so beautiful it made everyone cry happy tears. Psyche's sisters were there too, and when they saw how truly happy and loved their sister was, their jealousy finally melted away and was replaced by genuine joy for her good fortune. Love's eternal gift. And what happened to Eros and Psyche after their magical wedding? They lived happily ever after, of course, but their story gave the world something even more wonderful than just their own happiness. You see, their love was so pure and strong that it created something new and beautiful. Soon after their wedding, Psyche gave birth to a daughter, and they named her Hedone, which means joy or pleasure, but the good kind of pleasure that comes from love and happiness and beautiful things. Little Hedone had her father's wings and her mother's kind heart, and she flew around the world spreading joy and happiness wherever she went. When children laughed at play, when families hugged each other, when people saw a beautiful sunset and felt happy, that was Hedone's gift to the world. And Eros and Psyche, they learned that real love isn't about perfect trust or never making mistakes. It's about forgiveness, about being brave enough to fight for each other, and about loving someone so much that you're willing to face any challenge to be with them. The butterfly's secret. Now, dear child, do you know why we sometimes call the soul Psyche, and why butterflies are the symbols of the soul and transformation? It's because of our story. Psyche's name means soul, and just like a butterfly starts as a caterpillar, goes through a dark time in its cocoon, and then emerges more beautiful than ever, Psyche went through dark times and challenges, but emerged as a goddess, more beautiful and strong than she had ever been before. And just like butterflies, our souls can transform and grow and become more beautiful through love and courage and kindness. Every time you see a butterfly dancing in the sunlight, you can remember Psyche and Eros, and how their love was so strong that it overcame every obstacle and created joy for the whole world. So close your eyes now, little one, and dream of magical palaces and invisible servants, of gods with beautiful wings and princesses who were brave enough to face the impossible for love. Dream of butterflies and golden arrows, of tasks that seemed too hard, but weren't too hard for a heart full of love. And remember, the most beautiful and important things in life, love, courage, kindness, and joy, are invisible to the eyes, but perfectly clear to the heart. Sweet dreams, dear child. May your own heart always be brave enough to love, and may love always find its way back to you. The end.